Hi, my name is Chris Matthew. I'm the Strategic Manager here at Flannery Plant Hire, and I'm joined by Jen Thomson from MachineMax. What I've noticed over the last 2 to 3 years is an increasing number of customers coming to me asking for solutions to that question. And MachineMax and the data that we're able to provide MachineMax has been one of those answers.
Great. Yeah, it's amazing. It's also kind of seeing trends from our perspective and across the board within UK and Greater Europe is the increased focus on sustainability and the circular economy, and obviously a big component with the machines is the emissions, and that's a big contributor to in general the construction emissions, and so a good place to start is to understand that utilization and see how to improve it.
So you mentioned the green agenda. I think that's a really, really important part of this topic. Whether it be Flannery or your other customers, what are the other key things that people are asking for when it comes to data from a machine?
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, a big part is it's linked to fuel, definitely. The understanding the utilization, typically we see in the construction a lot of idling. Caterpillar publishes that it's almost 40% of operating hours on their website, which is crazy. And so a good place to start is to understand when and where that's happening, decrease it, and that has an implication on the fuel burn for you, for your fleet, in terms of making sure the equipment are used efficiently and properly. And through that, there's you decrease your fuel, you're then cutting down on your emissions, and you're also just cutting out that inefficiency. Locations are fascinating in terms of where the machines are. If you can understand the fleet that's on your site, if you can rearrange and call up a machine that you already have on site as opposed to getting a new one. So there's a handful of metrics which make a really big difference in understanding and utilizing the equipment.
Yeah, I just building on your points, I think for me, I'm constantly challenged with the actual cost of the unit cost of the fuel. So that's our customers looking to reduce their overall spend in that department. From my perspective, you've mentioned already idling time makes up to 40% of a typical machine's working day. So with my machines, most of the servicing takes place on an hour counter. Yeah. Therefore, the concept that for every 10 hours that the engine is working, or the engine is on rather, 40% of it, 4 hours of that is just idling. Yeah. But I still have to service it when it gets to its interval. So the cost and the logistics challenge with mothballing a machine while it gets serviced either out on site, sending a fitter out to that, the spares, the consumables that are part of that process, it all adds cost and delay onto our customers. So if we can educate our operators and our plant managers on site to try and drive down that idle time, it really has a huge impact on the total amount of hours worked on site, which is what we want ultimately.
Yeah. What's fascinating is it's not, I think operators have a bad rep in the industry too. Like it's not always them. What's really interesting is if you look at where idling happened, often that suggests that it's around the site design, and it's really, if you look at it holistically, it's very interesting to go and see, well, what can be done better. And if you alleviate site bottlenecks, it's not just one machine, it's the entire fleet that you improve the performance. So I think it's also important to look at it holistically.
Taking one of your points there, which I quite liked, one of the aspects that I really pulled out of the case study that we worked on together was when we actually did that time and motion study with regards to looking holistically at a site, speaking to the operators to try and get their feedback. All of a sudden, when you've got that data in your back pocket and you can ask the question of the operator, why did that happen? Why does that work the way it does? You actually get some really valuable feedback.
We have a crazy example where we had an operator who you could see in the data suddenly started taking really long lunch breaks. And immediately the first response is, well, what are you doing? And when you go and investigate, so you could see that they were operating really far from the canteen and they ended up walking back, which not only is just takes up time, but also safety hazard on a site, and so just surfacing all of that data, it helps to give context and understand what's happening. Yep. Another good example is we've started playing around with augmenting weather with some utilization of machines, and for example cranes. If you overlay wind speed on there, immediately your idling makes a lot more sense as to what's happening and why is it idling, actually it's unavoidable. So yeah, it's really interesting. It's good.
The weather overlay is a real good point, actually, because in earthworks we're heavily dictated to by how much moisture comes out of the sky, and therefore the consequent condition of our haul roads, whether our dozers are able to operate, how heavy the muck is anything sticking. One of my challenges again is carryback, so that's where material actually stays in the skip and we end up moving it around the park umpteen times in a day. So again, using data retrospectively in this example to go back and say, well, our numbers are down over this period, but look at the weather that links to that. I guess that's a really subtle level of complexity that we've just not had the ability to do. It's always been anecdotal, hasn't it?
Yeah. I think historically construction has been really behind in terms of improving productivity over the last 20, 30 years. And I think data is actually the answer to big improvements in that. And if we don't, this industry just not going to get more productive. I think that's the first step in the right direction. Connected machines is the first step towards autonomous machines. And so you have to go through that in order to make them completely autonomous. And that is, I think, the way the industry will go eventually. I don't think that means that we have a completely personnel-free or operatorless site, but that's a big step in that direction, and the first baby step is connected plant. So the risk of not addressing data is we're not going to make that step forward. I also think in terms of just improvements, all of the tier ones, big construction companies are setting out these hugely ambitious goals, which is amazing. Net zero, making sure that the whole value chain is circular, and that's great. But I think to make those improvements, you need to understand the current performance, and then it's incremental thereafter. And without that, it would be a challenge.
Yeah, I think that benchmark performance is really, really key. I get challenged a lot by my customers to say, well, I want to make a 10, 20, 30% improvement. I want to go carbon zero, as you say, by 2025, 2030. My challenge back to them is, well, where are we now?
Yeah.
I wanted to mention one of the elephant in the room situations that we've got, which is the increase in fuel duty, which is coming in next year. It's a fairly obvious impact on the potential cost that we're going to have on sites.
Yeah.
How do you see that linking to the adoption of data and looking at machine utilisation?
I suppose to answer that with an example, in the case study that we collectively worked on, we did an analysis of all the machine data across the fleet in UK. And what was interesting was that last September, 100,000 litres of fuel was burnt whilst idling.
That's a really scary number,
It's
isn't
a
it?
crazy number. And that's not to say you can get that down to zero. We all know that it's impossible to eliminate idling just with the nature of these sites and how things operate. But we do know that you can significantly decrease that. And the trick is not to get your idling data a week later. The trick is to get it in real time, understand where and when it's happening, and then you can make decisions in the moment that will directly impact and decrease those that inefficiency. So I think that data actually is the answer to massive fuel savings and trying to avoid a huge fuel bill next year.
Absolutely. And we shouldn't shy away from the fact there are other technologies coming onto the market as well with regards to the electrification, using alternative fuels, hydrogen fuel cells. All of those things will help us achieve that reduction of idle time. The beauty of an electric machine is that it doesn't idle, in effect. But it's not realistic to think that all of our plant, particularly on the larger end of the scale, is going to be electrified in the next 2 to 5 years. So we do, as you say, need to take that adoption of data approach so that we achieve those reductions in fuel burn.
Each OEM tends to have their own telematics system, and if you have a fleet made up of just one OEM, that's great because their systems really are amazing. You can log on and get the data. I think the challenge comes in piecing that all together. You want one pane of glass to your entire fleet, and the whole data journey it very much has been an evolution. It's only in the last few years that these interfaces have been standardized, or the output, and that's called AEMP 2.0. There's some ISO standards, and not everyone adheres to that in the same way. And so there's some metrics that are standard across all of these OEMs and third-party providers, and they output the data. But even then, there's still some challenges in consolidating that, and what one OEM might define idling as, another could do it completely differently. The second challenge is telematics, relatively speaking, is quite new. So not all machines have the hardware in place to connect the machines. There's still quite a lot of unconnected machines out there. So you need to be able to get data from those. And that's also true for smaller equipment and particularly a lot older equipment. So that's the second challenge. And then the third challenge is every time you send a machine out to a customer, they want the data for whilst it's on the site. What about you? What do you see from the...
I think I couldn't put it better myself. I think that the reality of the situation is we understand that we are often part of a collaborative supply chain for the clients. So not only have I got a mixed fleet, not only am I trying to provide productivity data in as near live format as possible, I also need to provide you and my client with data from my rental system, because I need to show what's on hire to whom at what point and make sure that they are not receiving another client's data. We're going in the right direction, but what do you want to see happen now on sites today to enable our clients to get that near real-time information?
It's a good question. I think the first step is getting a 100% connected fleet, because that builds the full picture. And then it's around bringing in the contextual data, so that when we were speaking about weather earlier, and you can actually make informed decisions, but whilst understanding what's happening on site without actually being there. To get there, you need your connected fleet, you need increased data frequency, you need to get the contextual view of what's actually happening, and surface that data in such a way that it's easy to make decisions, even tells you what decisions you should be making.
I really think that's an important point that you've made. One of my criteria when I was talking with MachineMax a couple of years ago about integrating our data into your solution was that it has to be intuitive.
Yeah.
It has to look and feel easy to use.
There's a lot of solutions out there. I mean, you can have your invasive canvas, which gives you a lot of data. That does require downtime and installation. MachineMax has some wireless sensors that you can just pop onto the machine, which is really good for whilst rental machines are on a site, and that doesn't require invasive installation. I think it all comes down to the type of data that you want, which will largely dictate what hardware you want to use.
One of my challenges with my clients, particularly in the larger sector, is looking at productivity. Can you run me through a little bit about the opportunity we've got in terms of providing information in real time for our clients in an earthworks environment?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, the first part is actually understanding the utilization of the machines, and very similar to all kit that's in the industry. But then the second part is actually looking at your haulage and the tonnage and the amount of material that is carried. And if you combine the two, you get some really fascinating insights. You can start to track where the machine is, what the whole route analysis looks like, if it's traveling empty and idling empty, active empty, and it's quite simple to combine those two sets of data. Of course, you need your accurate productivity data, but then you also need your real-time utilization. Combining the two, you get great insights, and it moves you towards making sure you are maximizing the productivity on a site.
My experience of working with MachineMax is that we've gone from this guesstimate of cost per tonne to a genuine actual number in terms of that truck has moved that much material over this time span, it's burnt this much fuel, this is the CO2 and particulate impact that we've had on the environment. We already know the wage cost and the capital cost of the asset, so we've got a genuinely accurate cost per tonne. Then we can start doing some clever things around, have we utilised that machine in the best way? Were we travelling at the optimum speed? Were we underweight? Were we overweight? What does our best truck look like versus our worst truck? And is there a reason for that?
There's some really great exciting bits of data you can plug in. For example, you can have scanners and looking at what's on the back of the haul truck and your carry back, and that helps calculate and show in real time where the issues are. You can also have cameras on your machine to assess the haul road and where the issues are, and instead of sending graders and support kit around continuously on a circle, you can then target specific areas where there are problems. Other areas where we've seen exciting development is integrating drone footage and BIM models. And then you get really, really cool insights because you are overlaying your BIM with where equipment are in real time. You've got your drone footage showing the progress of the site, and you can augment machines on top of it. It's really exciting if you start piece all of these technology together.
I know a lot of people in the industry who are looking at various pieces of machine control integrated with that drone footage, BIM models, couple that with our data and analytics, and all of a sudden we've got this digital side of the future that people talk about and people are working towards. So that's really, really exciting. And the other reality is, I think it's beginning to dawn on us that some of our big infrastructure jobs in the UK are strung out over vast distances. Look at HS2, for example. The reality of any one or group of individuals to be able to constantly keep their eyes on the entire site is just unrealistic. And the risks of attempting to do that are that we have pockets of parked machinery or underutilised machinery. So Jen, we've mentioned a couple of times the fact that we've pulled together a case study, which is really exciting to get out into the industry. From your perspective, why was it important that MachineMax contributed to the publication of this document?
Because I think it's awareness. I think there's no point in you as Flannery getting all this data around the machines and not sharing it and providing it to the customers. I think collectively within the industry, we can move together to make sure that there are fundamentals in place, that we've got the basic data as a starting point. And from there we can improve. But everyone should be striving for these connected machines to get the basic data in place. And that's what the case study is highlighting. It's highlighting the challenges in getting that. It's highlighting the advantages of once you have that data, what you can start doing with it. We've seen in the market that a lot of tier 1 construction companies are forcing providers of equipment to provide real-time data, tons of metrics, and everyone's running around and trying to provide that because it's terms for engagement to begin with. But what we haven't seen or understood is what the plan is to do with that data. I think everyone is just trying to fill their data lakes to get all of this, but there's no real plan in what to do with it. And maybe we could all start demanding the basics, because then you can get a plan in place and then collectively grow. But you have to start somewhere and it has to be obtainable.
Yeah, I think this is one of my frustrations from a Flannery perspective, is that if we're all working in silos, we're going to end up running around, as you say, trying to collect different bits of rich data but not having that end purpose. What I've really engaged with MachineMax is your roadmap to the next medium and long-term future in terms of where we want to get to. I think if we are able to get behind that as a construction industry, we'll put a lot more emphasis and pressure on the manufacturers to provide the right amount of data at the right intervals. So Jen, I just wanted to say thank you very much for supporting us in the production of this case study. I think it's really important that we've pulled all these thoughts and processes together and that we share it out with our customer base. I'm looking forward to hearing some of the critique from the clients to see what we've missed and what we can look to improve upon. And I look forward to following the roadmap and developing it further in the next few weeks.
Chris, thank you. It's been an honour. It's wonderful working with Flannery. You guys are pushing the industry and driving the agenda for data and how that helps construction. And it's really refreshing to work with guys like you and collectively how we can all make improvements.
Great stuff. Thank you.